Hey everybody, this is Chris Irwin, and welcome to the Rare Sense podcast. This is something that I've wanted to add to the content I'm putting out at raresense.substack.com, in addition to the blog articles I write for a while, but I just haven't gotten around to it until now. I'm not sure exactly the frequency I'm going to do this moving forward. It might be once a month, it might be every other month. I might be alternating articles and podcast episodes back and forth for a little while, but eventually I'd like to get it so that I'm putting out a podcast episode and a blog article every month. This is kind of coming about just because I keep having conversations with people about mind fitness that I think should be recorded and I think would be valuable for others to hear. My first guest today is Jeff Wiedenhofer. Jeff is a classmate and dear friend from the Naval Academy. He's a retired helicopter pilot, and then he went on to be a professional musician on Broadway as a guitarist. And now he's studying to be a licensed clinical psychotherapist at the University of Denver. He's studying to get a master's in social work. And with that, some of his training involves meeting with inpatients at a local hospital, but then also meeting with veterans at a VA clinic. So I think he's the perfect guest to kick things off here, both as a veteran, and he talks a little bit about his own mental health struggles, so to speak, and then now as someone who's helping work with veterans in that same space. We get into a lot of topics. We talk about repression, which I've spoken about before on my blog, and a whole bunch of other things around mind fitness. So I think it was a great conversation, and I hope everybody enjoys it. Quick disclaimer. Remember that I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, and nothing I say here should be construed as medical advice. If you need medical or psychiatric attention, please seek that from a licensed professional. Also note that any of the opinions that I express here are my own, and they don't represent any organization I work for now or in the past or somebody else. With all that said, here's Jeff Wiedenhofer. Okay, Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris.
The first episode ever. And I don't normally call you Jeff. It's it's Weed. And for anyone listening out there, that's just, I don't even know, actually, when you were in was that your call sign too as a pilot, or did you have a different one?
They made it Weeds.
Ah, okay.
Put the S on the end.
Why?
And that's what people in high school called me. That's what people called my dad in high school. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Wiedenhofer, Weeds, either one works.
Okay. So I'm going to assume most people listening to this are not familiar with you. So I gave a quick kind of intro there at the beginning, but give a synopsis of your background and what you're doing now.
Cool. Well, I've known you, Chris, for however many years.
30,
1993 was ago. Right? Yeah.
Close to
almost
30.
And we had sort of similar paths in life for a while where we were both active duty. We went to Naval Academy. I was active duty for 9 years, helicopter pilot, and then did some time in the reserves. Don't need to explain what that is, but what it means is I did 20 years sort of total in the Navy. I did 4 deployments to the Middle East. And after my 10 years of active duty, I moved to New York City and became a full-time professional performing musician. I got a lot of family members who were musicians, both sides, like college music profs and performers. So it wasn't a huge stretch for me, but it took me from kind of one side of the brain to the other, and did professional music. Eventually, after we left, my wife and our kids and I, we left New York City. I got a master's in music here where I live now in Boulder, Colorado at CU, University of Colorado, Boulder, and finished it right as COVID hit. So I went from an aspiring, ambitious freelancer to just totally unemployed dude, and went through a series of just questioning and a little depression and little disillusionment, disappointment in self and the world and all these things in the future, and came around to another real passion of mine, which is mental health, which I really didn't know much about. But then I started, I'm almost done now with a master's in social work at the University of Denver to be a clinical psychotherapist. So I'm in this world. I work 2 days a week at a hospital in inpatient mental health, which is people there for real serious reasons. a variety of reasons. But I also work 3 days at a VA counseling center for combat vets. So
And what's the little, like, do you have a little, initial thing that'll end up after your name? Like, I know there's like
yeah,
LCSW and there's some other things. What does that
yeah.
end up being something?
That's about right. When I graduate, I can be an LSW with my MSW, Master's in Social Work. But then it takes about 2 years of counseling under somebody's supervision, a licensed person's supervision, before I can take the test and be licensed. And then I'll be an LCSW, licensed clinical social worker.
Okay. And I guess what got you interested in that? Because you and I talk a lot, right? I mean, like we've been
Yeah.
very good friends for a long time, for decades now. And I don't know that we spoke much about mental health until
Yeah.
like the last couple of years, right? With a lot of the stuff that I've gone through.
Mm-hmm.
But it never struck me as something that you would want to get into professionally. So like where did that, and for what it's worth too, and I don't know if you want to talk about this at all, but you've never come across as somebody who really struggles mentally, to me anyways.
Mm.
You've always seemed very self-assured and confident and kind of know what you're doing. And obviously there's these things that you've done with kind of your faith that we might get into a little bit. That's led you, I think, to sort of internally analyze yourself a lot,
Yeah.
and some of your beliefs potentially.
Yeah.
But you've never struck me as somebody who's like anxious or depressed or anything like that. So I'm just kind of curious where the interest came about to do what you're doing now.
I think one thing you said is the sort of just internal kind of reflection that I've always kind of been that way. Not always good at it. Not always wasn't able to go too deep. But I also think you and I did that project, that Solid Man kind of music project. When was that? Like we're not like 6, 7, 8 years ago.
God, is it that long ago?
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. And the point of that, if you remember, was to put some music out that can be part of the like healing kind of process.
Yes, right.
For combat vets specifically, but any sort of military deployed, combat deployed related people who've done that. And I really got to the point where in my master's program in music, where I was like, I can use this to do good things with music. And that's the most exciting part of music for me. I was also at a point where we moved away from a big music hub. I wasn't in New York City. I wasn't in LA. I wasn't in Nashville. So it's like, you got to be realistic with how much you can really work. So my intentions had to kind of expand to things that were not just performance and grabbing $200 or $300 a night for just playing guitar. And I was involved in the church a lot. Those two things. And my faith really changed in a big way. And that's an understatement, right? Like,
yes.
Over maybe the last 5-ish years. And I was working at churches a lot and leading music and really had to come to grips with what was really going on. Like, what's really the point of singing a song together? Because I don't really believe a lot of these words I'm saying. They don't really mean anything to me. The sermon message that's preached just right now, I kind of don't really agree with, both like abstractly and spiritually and morally even sometimes. So why am I here? What value can I do with music? And I had to kind of get down to the essence of what prayer is, what sitting together in a room with other people and saying kind of good, trying to talk about things that you believe are good in music. So I was kind of really interested in that. But for me, yeah, I don't know if I've really even talked to you that much about it. That time during COVID, 2020, dude, I had shit for prospects, like nothing, like, and no real like vision of it going better. And that was I had to really face kind of some failure. Yeah, COVID brought a lot, stunted a lot of the opportunities and removed opportunities, but still, I brought my family, my wife and kids to this place out here in Colorado, and there wasn't much going. And even if I could really do my best and convince everyone I knew to hire me, it wasn't going to amount to much. It would have taken years to kind of build something up. And I was just at this point where it's like, why did I keep pushing this? Why did I keep doing this pursuit in my life? I mean, I love it and I'm good at it in many ways. In other ways, there's other people who are a lot better, but just facing, I think, failure was
Well,
really
so when
tough.
you say that though, like the failure piece, was that just like as a musician, that's how you saw yourself as like a failed?
Yeah. Well, okay. Good question. Yes. And not so much a musician. I mean, I believed in my talents and skills, right?
Yeah, well, so
And
do I.
I would, at that point, I was really comfortable performing in front of people too. That took a long time for me to really like be able to look people in the
Yeah,
eye through mistakes, through forgotten verses, words, and all,
yeah, yeah.
through microphones going out and like the lights turning off for some reason, like just whatever, people yelling, people disagreeing with my performance. I experienced that for a while too.
Really?
So
Where did
Hawaii, yeah, I mean,
disagreeing in what way?
so I performed every Saturday evening for a year, right on the beach at the
Yeah,
Halekoa Hotel.
yeah.
Um, and there was a lot of local people there who didn't like that I was there and that the hotel had put me there to perform every week because they had their kind of crew. So they felt it was kind of getting in on their territory. And while I was really good and I was gathering people, there was just sometimes there was a few people. There's one guy in particular who really didn't like the fact that I wasn't wearing a Hawaiian shirt. I was wearing like just a t-shirt, right? Like that's because that's what I preferred. I wasn't playing Hawaiian music, you know.
Okay. So wait, so these are
Yeah.
locals that are
Yes.
disagreeing with.
They didn't. Yep. They were also probably pretty drunk every time that they would get to that point
Sure.
too. It's just a group of people who drank at the benches out there every weekend.
Okay.
So so anyways, I was confident in me as a musician, but not confident in the opportunities that there were opportunities, and that I think maybe as husband, the perception of myself as somebody who should be a husband, a provider, right? The person making things secure, the person who is um, just making sure that everything is that there's security in people's lives, financial security, all these different things. And be honest, man, coming from a place like Naval Academy, when most of the people we know are doing really well financially at this point, right?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, like, I don't know. Actually, I would be my answer there because there's certainly
Yeah.
people that are still like active
And
duty in the military, and we know kind of what. I mean, you can look up online, find the pay
yeah.
scale there and what they're making, and it's comfortable,
And
obviously. But like people that we know, and I won't name any names, but have gotten out and gone to successful careers in whatever it may be, whether that's small business or Wall Street or
yeah.
whatever. Yeah, there's certainly people out there
And
doing very well, but I don't know if I would consider it like
okay,
a
we don't even
lot
need
of
to
people.
ask Chris. We don't even need to answer that question.
Right.
The issue was my perception, right?
Okay. Fair enough.
And like I said, I lived in New York 10 years, and we came across people that
Yes.
acquaintances of yours and mine who were like, "Hey, I'm just going to make a couple $1 million over these few years and then try something else."
Yep.
And for real, and they would, and they did.
Yep.
And so here I am, just fucking scrape. Can I swear? Is that okay?
Fine by me. Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
just scraping by, and without a lot of opportunities. So that just put me in a kind of a dark place, and I was not good about talking to my wife about it. To Jen,
Let's.
that's another aspect.
I want to talk about that concept because it's something I think about actually a lot these days, which is sort of what you're dwelling on, which is this idea of success and failure.
Yeah,
Because I think we define just like you're saying, right? We define ourselves so strongly by that
yeah,
concept in a lot of ways. And I think about it too, because I'm sort of like you in the sense that I've never gone out and tried to get a job that just made a lot of money. I've certainly hoped for jobs that will make a lot of money, but I mean,
yeah,
I currently work in nonprofit, right? And like, you're not going to
yeah,
make tons of money working in nonprofit, and you're probably not going to make a ton of money doing what you're doing
nope,
either. And I've always tried to think, yeah, but that's not success, right? Like, or like try to make myself believe we shouldn't define success monetarily, right? We shouldn't think like that's what, but it's very hard to decouple those things because our society is very much set up in that way. And I think it does lead to a lot of us thinking, regardless of how everything else might be going in our lives, right? We'll look at that metric and be like, but I'm still not making all the money, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And have that yearning, whatever it may be for. Like I know in my case, I'm not interested in money for money's sake. I'm interested in money, quite frankly, because it gives you time and freedom of action, right? Like that's always what I thought. I'd never understood people that make tons of money and then they just keep at it and then they work themselves to the bone. Like as far as I'm concerned, if you have $100 million in the bank, like I don't know what you're doing working, right? Really, unless you love it that much, it makes no sense to me. It's like if I would then spend all my time doing whatever it is I wanted to do, whether that's travel or hang out with my kid, whatever, just record music. So, but for me, it's always been about getting enough, being financially independent enough to then have that freedom, right?
Yeah.
But even without that, part of me says, yeah, but you should be like, this is a very stoic type thing to think, right? You should be able to say, yeah, but you can be happy regardless of what you have, right? Because happiness is about not wanting anything from a stoic perspective. It's the feeling like we don't have enough. It's the wanting of something that we don't have in the present moment that makes us then unhappy because it's like, well, I'm not where I want to be. And then we've talked about this before, right? Then we lack presence and then we're off thinking about something else. So I guess the question there would be, did you think about that at all? Or at the time were you kind of just stuck on this idea of, hey, I'm a failure or whatever, or like I feel like I'm
stuck, so absolutely stuck, and I never really had to face really what I believed and what I was raised with and what I allowed myself to to just the things that I put value on. Never really had to face it. So here I am, all of a sudden, like by a lot of things that were just sort of subconscious values of mine, right? Like I should be the one taking care of the wife and the kids, even if the wife works. I should be the one going off Monday through Friday. I should be the one taking business trips, so she can stay home with the kids. A lot of these are just cultural norms, sure. Right? And it just wasn't working out that way. And I felt like shit. And maybe it was also because this had happened over a period of time too. We lived in New York for 10 years and I was doing great there, as well as you can as a freelance performing musician. Then we moved away. We just got tired. 10 years in New York was enough with kids. Moved to New Orleans, tried to get some work going there. Didn't really happen. My wife got the job opportunity in Hawaii to get back on active duty. Had some music going there. But over all this time, it's like it was just, I was kind of receding away from opportunities to that could pay any bill, jobs that could pay the bills. So maybe it was an accumulation of time of just the stress of like, shit, it's still not happening here. Holding on to this belief, it's going to happen. The next thing that's going to happen is going to be really big. I just started, like somebody was talking about Pete Carroll, the Seahawks coach. That's one of his big mantras. Like the next thing that you have to believe, the next thing that's going to happen to you is going to be great. That's how he deals with like failure, or challenges, right? I was doing that for years and years and years, and it just wasn't happening. And here I'm in Colorado, and it's COVID, and there ain't a big music industry here, and it's like I got to face it. I got to face all this stuff I've been trying to do and believing about myself, and just didn't have the humility to like forgive myself for going through that for years and kind of putting stress on a little bit of stress on the family as well.
So did you ever think during that time though, because I talk a lot about storytelling in my own experience of getting stuck in like a net. I hate thinking of thoughts positively and negatively. I'm a big proponent of like, it's either helpful or unhelpful, right? Like a negative thought isn't, like a negative thought can be useful. And a thought where you say, I'm really out of shape and I need to get in the gym.
Mhm.
okay, that's negative, but if it inspires you then to like exercise every day, that can be a useful thought, right? But I talk a lot about this storytelling thing, like from my perspective, where I got into this storytelling of sort of very similar, right? This kind of, and mine was more professionally oriented back towards my time in the military, but of being a failure and letting people down and like a lot of guilt. And it just became this sort of mantra that was over and over in my head.
Mm.
And then, and that turned into physical symptoms and really sent me down a negative rabbit hole. And it wasn't until I started thinking, until I sort of woke up to the fact that I was just telling this story to myself that wasn't based in any, like no one else was telling the story other than me.
Yeah.
Literally no one else. Even though I thought that, like I think we've talked about this before, but I certainly spend a lot of time, way too much time, or did, not so much anymore, thankfully, but worrying about not what other people think of me, but what I think other people think of me, right?
Mhm.
And also believing that other people think about me a lot, which they don't.
Yeah.
Like nobody does, right? And we
Yeah.
all, I think, so many of us walk around with this idea that other people are thinking about us as much as we think about ourselves, and it's just
Yeah.
not true, right? Because like all you have to do is look at your own thoughts and think, how much do you think about other people, especially people
Yeah.
you don't see all that often, right? And it's
Yeah.
basically zero, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yet you're walking around with this story, like in your case and in my
Yeah.
case, that you're just like no one else is telling you this story, right? At least I don't know. I mean, did you feel like anyone like in your family was making you feel this way? Was this purely just like
Dude,
we're
this
going
was
to
all
load up the
internal.
rifles and turn them on ourselves and like completely,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
self-inflicted?
This was completely internal. And, maybe it was, I don't know, maybe it was COVID related. I never really related it to the whole, like the kind of world slowing down and having to deal with this sort of
Yeah.
pain of separation, all these things. Maybe that was part of it too, but it just hurt a lot,
Well, I think,
and
that point though, just to interrupt you quickly,
yeah,
I think that's a really good point where my sense is, and I don't have any data to back this up really, other than sort of general trends out there of increased anxiety, increased depression and sort of trending worse. You'd probably know
yeah,
better than me based on what you're studying. So correct me if I'm wrong here with any of this. But I think, yeah, the whole what we did as a result of COVID probably had that same effect on a lot of people, right?
yeah,
You're spending a lot of time by yourself or around a
yes, yeah,
limited number of people.
yeah,
And so you're sort of forced to face potentially what's going on in your mind in a way where you can't be as distracted as you were before. Like you can still distract yourself with digital stuff, but you still
yeah.
are kind
That's
of,
not facing it.
no, not at all. Not at all. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case for a lot of people, where it's like this sort of lockdown, all this stuff that we had to endure for a couple of years kind of forced that upon people to some extent, right? Made them sort
Yeah,
of evaluate where they were in life.
yeah. I think that's a real general statement that I see. I see in headlines pretty often. You probably do too.
Yeah.
And for me, it's kind of cliche and kind of annoying now to see it on every single newspaper. COVID did this to a lot of people, and
Right.
maybe to
Right.
you. Fuck off! Like let's keep moving forward. And at this point in my
Yeah. Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
I got a lot going on, and I can move forward. But
Well,
yeah,
and I think,
one interesting thing is that that statement that I said, it just hurt. And pain is processed. Physical pain and emotional pain are processed in one place in your brain, essentially. And so, I think maybe what we might be talking about, or where this might lead, is
can you
that
talk about that a
what,
little bit? If you can dig into that, just I'm
yeah.
curious
So
because you probably know more about this
perhaps,
than me.
yeah, it is. And I try to bring this up, man. So let me just finish up. You asked, the original question was, why'd you get into mental health?
Yeah. Right. That was the original question.
Yeah, this is late 2020 where I'm talking about, where it's just nothing's going on and it's finally getting to me, right? And I just started going back to some practices I had, which some quiet meditation and some affirmations. paraphrasing here, dude, you're a good guy. You're a good husband. You're going to find something to do. Your wife loves you. Your kids think you're incredible. You are raising them, et cetera, right? I would say those things out loud and do some meditation. And I saw a therapist for a little while. Probably could have benefited from seeing him more often, but I was kind of on this track of just kind of slowly stepping out of the fucking depth of that depression, right? And I was using therapy, and I was using all these tools and interventions that so many different therapists help people use. The tools, they're interventions that we use. So I get into mental health, and it was really good timing. It was like December 2020 was kind of my low point. The next March, 3-4 months later, I started the program, and all this stuff just made a lot of sense. Anxiety and depression related, especially, made a lot of sense. So now, I meet with a lot of veterans who are anxious and depressed, and especially a lot of combat vets who are repressing emotions and
Yes.
trauma and pain, emotional pain from years and years ago. Vietnam vets that hold this shit down for decades, 50 years, some of them.
Yep.
And I try to talk about, now getting back to that part of the brain, and the other counselor, who's a former Ranger, brings this up a lot too with men. It seems to open a little bit of door towards having a little bit more vulnerable conversation about where we are as men, where we are with emotions, where we are in therapy, and where we are with stress and anxiety and all these things that come from the pain that we've had in our life. Yes, the same part of the brain processes emotional pain and physical pain. What that means is symptoms can come from either of those sources of pain, right? And it can literally feel and do things to us. Depression can do something to you that feels awful, even though it's up here in your head. Your body feels like shit. Your chemicals are changing to a way that does not feel good anymore, right? So I'll just leave it at that. We can.
Yeah. Well, this is a bunch on that. I mean, the first one I would say is, that it seems obvious that, of course, your brain affects your body. Of course it does, right? Like everything we do is because our brain is essentially telling our body to do it, right? Like the words that are coming out of my mouth right now, me moving my arm, right? That's a signal from my brain that's creating a physical change, right? And then yet like in my case, when my anxiety started manifesting itself physically in sort of dizziness and brain fog and fatigue and all these things, you think that's, at least in my case, and a lot of people go down this road, you think that's got to be a disease or it's got to be and it doesn't occur to you like, well, that can just be your brain doing that to your body, right? And it's strange that we don't make that connection, that it's like, well, of course you can do that, because we all know things like if you get nervous, right? Like let's say you're going to give a speech or something like that. Yeah. We feel that physically, whether it's butterflies in our stomach or we get nauseated or we sweat or we get hot.
Yeah, your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate increases.
Physical manifestations.
You feel nauseous, that's your stomach. There's things happening there too. All these systems are controlled by different parts of your brain.
Yes. And so if you just take a second to think about that, it's like, well, just carry that same line of logic as far as you want to go with it. And your brain is extremely powerful in terms of physically changing your body. So then on the sort of the repression point, and this is something I talk about as well. I think I just wrote a blog article about it maybe 2 months ago called Learning to Cry, which was all about, and we were talking about this, I think the last time we spoke.
Yeah.
We don't think of, or at least I never thought of, the fact that I could store emotion in my body physically.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like a bunch of woo nonsense. Like, that's bullshit. What do you mean I can store energy, basically energy in my body, right? And it wasn't until I had essentially done that for years. And I think this is something that a lot of veterans struggle with is you have a job to do. It's generally speaking, you're sort of like, there's a lot of bravado and this feeling like you're not allowed to cry about things or you can't because it's like, look, we got a job to do here. So it's like, we just stuff all that down, but then we don't kind of go back and figure out a way to process that.
Yeah.
And I never thought, well, in my mind, I guess it was always like, yeah, but it's just goes away, right? Like you have this feeling to cry or whatever, and it just goes away. And the analogy I now use is like, that's sort of like holding in a fart, right? It's like, you can only do that for so long.
Yeah.
And it's going to get painful, and eventually that's got to come out. And
it's
so
it's going to be toxic at some point in your body.
Right. So that's a crude analogy, but I think it's appropriate because we've all done that at some point for embarrassment reasons or whatever. First date or something, right? It's like you get in the car at the end of the night and finally like, oh God, you're like, please,
windows
get
down.
out of the car.
Get the windows down. Yeah.
But I think it's really an appropriate analogy because I think I used an example that you told me where you found yourself. I can't remember when this was. You were like driving somewhere and the song Lightning Crashes came on the radio and you just found yourself like in tears for no reason. Like, where is this coming from? And I would find myself watching some cartoon with my kids that's sort of heartfelt or like Iron Man dying in, oh, sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't seen whatever Endgame Avengers. And I'm getting all choked up and it's like, why am I getting so emotional about this? And the answer was like this stuff from years was like still stuck in me. Right? Like it's like gets locked away in places. Cause again, your body has to figure out something to do with it. And it was like, it was basically saying, hey, this is an opportunity to get rid of this stuff. Like, are you going to let it happen or not? And and I would still kind of push that down. And it wasn't until I started like leaning into that and being like, okay, this might be weird and I may have to go off in a room by myself, but I'm really going to lean into that feeling and let myself cry as much as I possibly can. And the feeling of relief I would have afterwards was palpable. It was noticeable. And it's also something that I could not believe how much of it was in there until I did some things where I did some stuff where I was crying for hours, like hours, and loud and wailing. It was like a workout I'd be breathing in between this stuff. And you're just amazed by, you know what I mean? Like, think about that, the amount of energy that's stored in you that's coming out through that. And I can only, so when you let me ask a question then with that, right? When you deal with veterans, and again, obviously don't give me any personal information here, but like, let's say Vietnam veterans, who maybe have been doing that, to your point, for what, 50, 60 years?
Yeah. I had a guy say it the other day, 50 years. I've been holding this in. Yeah.
And do they realize that? Is it something that's, do they look at it sideways and not understand it?
There's so much to this question, and every person's different, but that example, a guy who saw awful, awful things as an 18, 19, 20-year-old, right?
Yep.
Friends being hurt, being killed, body parts, blood, kids, women, just name your awful, awful thing that that you could see in that war, right? Boy, where do you start? Like, first off, we have to acknowledge our culture, our context here. You're a man, I'm a man. We come from this proud environment. You were in the SEALs. I was a Navy officer too, came from Naval Academy. The guys don't cry in any context, even at fucking funerals. Pardon my language.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about, storing energy. Well, yeah, and So what do people, I guess your question is like, how do people react when you start talking about this? They act the way they always have, whatever they're comfortable with, which is for the most part, continuing on this practice of repression
Right.
and squeezing it back. And only, maybe you let just a little bit out at one time, at some point. But what one possible way to address this is to put your traumatic, difficult experience, painful experience in context. That happened back in year 19 whatever, or Iraq and Afghanistan vets from back in 2000 whatever. Okay, you were young, you were a young man in this context. Your expectation, the cultural expectations were this and that. You growing up, your dad raised you to be a strong man and to not show emotion, to be tough. Okay, cool. That helped you in some ways. It certainly helped you in that difficult combat deployed environment. That was a good thing. Now you're 35 or you're 75 or you're 55 or 45. You're not in that environment. Now you want to not be holding in this and getting this kind of sickness, this emotional sickness that you're trying to hold down. You're okay. Maybe, hopefully, I'm talking to somebody who is, maybe financially stable. Maybe they're stable in a relationship. You've got a wife, man. And for women too, you have a husband, you have kids, you have friends. Do you want to keep acting like you did when you were 20 years old? Because you're not in that environment anymore. You have an opportunity. And this gets to a whole big question that you and I have discussed many times before. Like, you have choices here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy to change your habits, which are to repress. It's not fucking easy. It's not. I had to, sort of on my own, that example I gave of my experience, I had to learn how to let go of some things. And it took weeks and weeks before it was finally started to be like, okay, I feel the weight of that starting to shift off of me, and I can leave some of it behind. That's something a lot of people, they want the end result if they can even face it. Yes, I do admit I want that end result, but taking that first step into this space of, yeah, but crying is not what I do. Okay, we got to address that first before we can take this step.
Yeah. So that's the kind of question. You talk to people who feel that way, right? Like, that's not what I do. That's not.
I talk to people who are across the spectrum of this. Some people who don't want to do anything different. They won't even admit that it would be better to have a more vulnerable relationship with their wife. They're just like, fuck that. I'm just going to keep on drinking. And somebody,
A good call.
we all know these people.
Sure.
That's not.
I think what the thing that I try to impress. Obviously, I'm not dealing with it. I'm not counseling anybody, right? I'm sort of putting out broad information based on my experience that I think can kind of help people in general, just sort of like sort themselves out, right? But the distinction that I think was important for me is we're talking, when I think about repression, right?
Yeah.
It's a physical catharsis that I'm talking about. Like, you were actually, it's taking the cap off the overinflated bicycle tire and like depressing the valve to let tension out. And that doesn't have to make you change the way you feel about any of this stuff. It doesn't have to but you in my mind, like my experience, we're talking about like quite literally detoxifying your body, like relieving toxicity and strain that is physically on you. Even if you know what I'm saying? Like, you can then kind of work on the way you feel about any of this stuff. But like, that physical release, I think, is so critical because
but Chris, you've come to a point where you have recognized that that's important for you.
Sure.
And then you came to the point where you're willing to try it. And then you came to the point where you're willing to actually go through with it and see it and feel it happening to you. But that wasn't, that did not happen easily or quickly, right?
True. Yeah. Yeah. I just wonder if folks have a difficult time decoupling that. You know what I mean? Like that idea, like, yeah, but I don't
Yeah.
cry. That's an attitude about sort of the nature of it, not,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like it's almost like prescribing something that's going to physically alleviate something where it's like, look, you don't have to change the way you necessarily feel about any of this stuff. But I'm telling you, if you can just let yourself do this, and I tell guys too, like I tell this story in the that article that I wrote about going to see Top Gun Maverick, right? And the original movie, as much as I think I told you, I watched the original again with my kids like a couple weeks ago or a few months ago, and I just thought it was so dumb. Like most of it, it was so there's so much stupid stuff in it, and they're so. I said you should call it sweaty people. Like they're so sweaty the whole time. Everybody is so sweaty in that movie. But still, that movie, for better or worse, completely changed the trajectory of my life because that's the movie I saw that made me want to go into the Navy and originally become a fighter pilot. And that's true for a lot of people. Like, I don't know what the numbers are from a recruiting standpoint, but that movie, I guarantee, made a lot of us want to go do that.
Yeah.
So going to watch this sequel now, 35 years later, whatever it ended up being, if that's right. I was like, oh, this will be fun and it'll be great. And I'd heard good things about it. But I was like emotional from the word go. It was like there was something about it that triggered again, and now I know to kind of analyze this, where there was something about it that triggered something in me that made me like, again, my body was like, there's some emotion tied to this. And so the whole movie, I'm sitting there like getting all choked up and trying not, and it was great. Like I really enjoyed the movie too. I thought it was fantastic. But I could just feel all of this energy. Now, I'm still not at the point where I'm just going to break down and bawl in the middle of a movie theater with all these people.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, for nothing else, it's distracting. And I'm not somebody who's just going to sit there and quietly sob to myself. Like my wife was next to me and she's kind of got tears a lot as well. She's former military, former Navy. And she can kind of do that. If I'm going to go there, it's going to be loud and I just know the way it's going to be. And I'm not going to do that. So the movie
and you also have social awareness about you, which is one side of mental illness is not being able to recognize what like norms and expectations are, where you just can't even spot it, whether you choose to agree with it and follow it.
Yeah. So, but I have the awareness now to think, okay, that needs to happen, because if I don't let that happen, that's problematic.
Yeah. So
I kind of kept a lid on it through the movie, but kept it sort of at this just below boiling point spot. And luckily we'd driven 2 cars. So I told my wife, I'm like, take all the kids, like you're going to drive them home. And I got in my truck and for 15 minutes driving was just, in the parking lot for probably 5 minutes. But I mean, I was like wailing, crying loud. And that's the way I do it now. But I like let it happen. There was at that point, I was not putting the brakes on it at all. It was like full on, let it go, even go overboard a little bit.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what that is, what crying is, It's a physical body response to something, right? It's not just, going back to like cultural expectations, it's not just like showing weakness. That's not what crying is. It's something a human body. If you live in a human body, you're at some point, it's gonna want your flesh is gonna want to cry, and there's a reason for that, right?
Yep. Well, do you have more? This is something I don't know actually. Do you have more science on that, like exactly what's going on?
So now I probably have at some point. Nothing comes to mind. I'm not the expert right now, but there is so much evidence, research, and so many things that we know now about. Oh gosh, I have my favorite book here, by the way. So I don't know if people can.
Yes. So I just recommended that on my.
The Body Keeps Score. It blew my mind. I have learned so much about humanity from this book. And one example I wanted to bring up here is how when you're young, a child in a development stage, and some physical threat happens to you, whether you are actually hit by somebody or somebody near you is hurt or threatened, the stress of that goes into your brain and you hold it, right?
Yep.
And the younger you are, the more it affects how your brain develops from here. And when we say how your brain develops, it's where the neurons are firing and where, it's just kind of the habits that we get into. So I learned to understand from the study of early trauma that, boy, these things, the body keeps scoring. It doesn't go away. It affects everything.
Right.
It affects how you deal with it. So I've seen people on the inpatient psychiatric clinic who just curl up on a ball and don't talk to anybody. Fetal position. That's how they live their life right now.
Yep.
One 19-year-old girl that I saw a couple months ago. Well, she has a history of abuse when she was a kid.
Yep.
And there's all kinds of dissociation, and there's kind of, anger responses and all this trauma that happens. So how do you release that from your body?
Yes.
Because you're still holding in the tension that you feel when those things happen. And yeah, crying is one way to do it. There's a lot of different ways to do it, right? But crying is like the central sort of emotional release that our bodies know, that we know.
Right. And the whole point that I try to make is that it's an energetic response, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think in Western medicine especially, everything is chemically oriented. We think of ourselves as physical matter, and we treat everything with chemicals, whether it's pharmaceuticals or whatever. And we pay almost no attention to the energetic side of us, which is what makes us alive, right? If you think about it, the difference between a dead person and an alive person, or think about like a dead brain and an alive brain, structurally, physically, exactly the same. The thing that makes the brain alive is electricity and energy, right? Mm. That's what's making us, this body right now, live, right? I could be dead, and the difference would be there's no energy associated with it anymore. But we sort of like dismiss that, like it's not, like we're not energetic. And things like crying, it's a energetic response, and you have to dissipate that energy. Otherwise, it gets stored in you. And again, I used to think that was nonsense. That was just, well, what do you mean? How can that? And it's like, no, because again, it's got to go somewhere. And I mean, I've heard of people that get, and I don't know if this is factually true, but you can get things like myofascial release type things that'll trigger emotional reactions, right? Certain like pressure points or types of massage or whatever in certain parts of your body will trigger even a memory from, I've heard of this happening. Again, I don't have the facts to back this up, but it makes sense to me. It's like your body is like, okay, I don't know what to do with this. This guy is not letting this out. We're going to stick it over here in this tissue. Right?
Yeah. That's not my world either, but it does make sense that your nerves, that you're sort of triggering and flaring, I guess, if you stick something in or press or impress.
So how do you deal with that then? Like when you're talking to people, what works, if anything, to get somebody, if someone is stuck in that idea of like, but I don't do that, right? Like that's not who I am. That's not what men do potentially, whatever they may say. What's the kind of techniques that potentially gets people past that?
Well, there's different ways to do it, and you can start internally, like cognitively, right? Let's just talk through some things like, what do you believe about men and emotions? And start peeling that back a little bit. Well, I don't think men should do this. Okay, over here, do you also understand that you're storing up all this trauma in you? Do you understand that's why you're anxious and you're paranoid? And why you are having maybe some blood pressure, problems these days. Not making a direct relationship there, but lots of different things in people's lives. Why you keep breaking up with women because you yell at them. Why they keep breaking up with you, right? Why you have a bad relationship with your kids, because you just keep fighting and accusing. Why do all these things in your life? Do you also believe it's good to kind of release some of this stuff and show yourself sometimes to the right people in the right moments emotionally, you know. Yes, yes, and yes. Okay. What's one place we could work on doing it? That's just one example of how you could work with somebody. Another example is to, and there's all these sort of evidence-based theories, to get people to go back and tell the stories of when they were hurt, their painful experience. And a lot of those modalities, those interventions, those techniques, if you're going to do it, you know, if your employer like the VA may have to make sure you're actually licensed and certified in that too, because when people start telling stories of traumas and painful experiences, it can get really problematic, right? Dissociating, angry, not knowing what's going on, yelling, suicidal, all these things. So there has to be care. But another way to do it is just externally onto your body. Let's go for a walk and talk about it. A lot of veterans do yoga, meditative yoga as therapy, because you're moving through your body and you're getting some things your body is relaxing as you're doing it, right? So you're getting your mind to accept I'm in a safe space now too. You can listen to music and do it, you know. That's a big one. I mean, there's evidence now, you know, if you listen to music that is down at the resting heart rate, or the BPM, beats per minute, the tempo is down in there. There's evidence that it will calm your body down, and that tells your brain through the parasympathetic nervous system. It tells your brain you're relaxed. That further calms your body down, right? So
That's interesting. I
Yeah.
never heard that, although that makes sense. A beat that's close, whatever it is, 60 beats per minute or something like that, right? Huh. That's interesting.
60, 70. Yeah. For some people, it could be even a little, you know, a resting heart rate could be higher, or.
Well, sure. Can you talk? I mean, I know what this is, but just for anybody that doesn't understand the difference between sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system, can you?
Yeah. It's, boy, I keep learning more about it. I am a novice, but it is just fascinating. It's just incredible that there's kind of these two nervous systems that go from the stem of your brain through into your body and connect with everything, your organs and your nervous system, and they control your heart rate and they control your breathing, right? Stomachs and kidneys and all these different things. And the way I've heard it described is the sympathetic nervous system is kind of the arrow up. When that thing gets activated, say, you know, you're in a situation where something alarming happens, like all of a sudden you're awake and you're going, right? The sympathetic nervous system cranks it up. The parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of like comes from your brain and connects to everything in your body, is the thing that helps you back down.
Right.
And it doesn't back you down so far that you fall asleep and then you know 10 beats per minute and then you're like, you know, it's not that. It gets you into your resting place. And both are necessary for us to survive and to live.
Right.
But good Lord, so many of us, and especially in the environment we're talking about, the context, right? Military and combat vets, people who've experienced painful things and traumatic things, they spend an awful lot of time cranked up.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so that's why it's good to know for every human being on the planet, especially in our society of anxiety, right? Like, it's good to know these things, that you can actually affect yourself, influence what's going on with you right now. It's hard to do. We'd rather get on our phones and just be distracted and avoid it, right?
Right.
But things I learned to do, you know, meditative practice, affirmation, quiet time, exercise. Those things do back you up.
Because what I found with myself is that, and it's hard. I don't know that you can measure it in any way.
Yeah.
At least I don't know that there probably is. I'm sure there's some way these days with some biometric tracker or something like that where you can tell if you're, like, heart rate variability, I think has something to do with it, although I'm not that versed in it, but tell if you're sort of in sympathetic mode or parasympathetic mode. But I know for myself, I definitely felt that, where that sort of state of hypervigilance, always in fight or flight, And it's like you're never decompressing, even though you think you are. You go to sleep every night, but your body really doesn't go into that rest and digest mode. So therefore, it's like your organs don't work exactly properly, and you have stomach problems, right? Or you don't, you have digestive issues and things like that because your body is just never getting into that mode. and it was and it's like, oh, well, all I have to do is go take a nap. And it's like, yeah, in my experience, you need to be more, I don't want to say aggressive, but like more active in, you have to like turn it on, because what you've done, at least in my kind of experience, is I've like overwritten my circuitry to some extent through my actions to always be in sympathetic mode.
Yeah.
And I've done that over go ahead.
Can I pause you right there? And what we should point out here is your brain has been trained to do that.
Yes.
This is not some like woo-woo abstract spirituality. This is the neurons in your brain have, one person described it to me as, it's like grooves. With your habits are grooves. It's not that you can't get out of them, but the neurons form and connect in a certain way that your behavior, it's not just behaviors, but your bodily functions, right? Become a certain thing and a certain tendency.
Right.
I just want to point that out because it's not the discussion here. I appreciate what you are doing here is just very matter of fact. Yeah. This is, it's science, from Anchorman.
It's got a bad rap these days, right. Science. It's like, yeah. And so I think we sort of intuitively think, well, all I've got to do is go sit by the pool or take a nap or have a cocktail or something, and that should kind of fix these things. And it's like, to your point, no, it's who you are now.
Yeah.
You are your habits. You are an amalgamation of a bunch of patterns. And that's what makes you every day. That's what makes you feel like there's a continuity of you from one moment to the next.
Yeah.
And if you have, to your point, created the grooves that are always in this mode, well, that's the way you're going to be carried forward. You have to actively overwrite the software, right? You can't just reboot the computer. You can't just Control-Alt-Delete and take a nap and wake up. It's like, no, we have to actually go in and write new stuff on top of it. And the way you do that is through actually acting in a new way, right? Like I have to do stuff that's creating a new pattern of behavior. Whether that's meditation, yoga, I'm a huge fan of Qigong. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's kind of movement and breath work, and sort of Qi is energy. Yeah. And I really find it effective, but it takes work. And I think that's the part that people struggle with. It's because we feel like work is a struggle, right? But most of us, especially that come from sort of backgrounds like ours, we equate it with things that are physically sort of demanding and working out hard and working late and just go harder and go faster and everything. And it's this sort of weird dichotomy of struggling to do something that's decompressing you, right? Like which is weird for a lot of us. Like, what do you mean I'm going to sit there and just think or try not to think, notice my thoughts for 20 minutes? Like that's a waste of time. And it's like, no, believe it or not, that's a really good use of your time. You might feel like you're doing nothing, but you're doing a lot.
And maybe the fact that it is so hard to do that should clue us into the fact that, I'm not real good at relaxing and slowing down and thinking in like a self-compassionate kind of way. Yeah. Maybe I'm actually not good. Maybe the fact that it's really hard to sit here, and not grab my phone and scroll through stuff and not get up and do something else, because that's hard to just sit and relax, get your body, your own self, right, to relax. Maybe that shows you that we're not in such a good place. But I like what you're saying, because this all gets to the whole question, dilemma concept of like, what really can I change? I think there's a big part of our culture that has no interest in change in ourselves. And a lot of us carry that. We're taught that, and we've subscribed to that over our life. So that's a thought pattern, right? That we can't change. And I
Yeah.
remember hearing one person one time, they were talking about how when you hold, they're talking about the negative bias that our brains have, and I won't go into all of it, but he's basically he then went on to say, if you have to focus on a positive thought about yourself longer if it's going to stick with you and you're going to start believing it than a negative thought. That's a scientific fact. It's measured in research. It's like 22 seconds. You have to just stick with it, and then it'll stick with you longer. And the person who was explaining this was made the point. So you see, when you think about like positive stuff about yourself and other people in your situation, you're changing your brain. And the other person was like, well, your brain is always changing.
Correct. Yes.
It's just
everything you do changes your brain.
Wherever you are right now is where you have come to, and
Yep.
where you're going to be in 10 years is going to be different in some way. Do you want it? Well, I guess the question is, what do you want it to be? Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing that's so difficult about some of this stuff is we like things fast, right? We want to take a drug and it fixes me, or whatever. Like I'm gonna go do some treatment and like it's gonna fix me. And you have to recognize that you, like in my case, our case, it's taken 47 years to create what exists as me right now.
Yeah.
And it's not going to take 47 years more to completely change to whatever, but it's like something where you have to adopt a practice that's going to slowly change you over time, right? That's going to slowly sort of degroove some of these things and create, to your point, like create a habit of positive thinking in certain circumstances, to create a habit of being able to process emotions. That's not going to happen overnight. The same way, if you've never worked out in your life and you want to go run a marathon, it's not like, well, I think I'll work out a couple times and I'll just go for it, right? And I'll be fine. Yeah. Like that's not going to.
I love that example with ex-military, especially because we all had to go through boot camp and had to go through some type of regular physical training, right? And regimens and expectations. And obviously you can't just drink beer and sit on the couch for 3 weeks and then get up, expect to get a really fast 1.5 mile time.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And it's no different in your mental health too, your physical and mental health. This is your body we're talking about.
Right. And it's like, and it might be uncomfortable and painful at first too. Yeah. If you have never run or you stopped working out and it's been a few years, when you start again, it's going to hurt and it's going to be painful and you're not going to see results right away. You're going to be sore and it's not like the beer gut's going to disappear after one day. So, but unfortunately, again, when we come to kind of like this mind fitness model, we think like, oh, I tried meditating once, it didn't work. And
it didn't work.
Well, what do you mean it didn't work? like you gotta stick with that, man. You gotta try that for at least a couple of months and kind of get the hang of it to some extent to even see some results there. And you just can't expect anything different out of it,
Yeah. I'm just curious for you. I mean, would you mind sharing something that you've gone through and, because I related my experience of just believing a bunch of that I had failed in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Like real deeply held that. It just kind of came up one day like, oh shit, that's what it is. I feel like I failed. And slowly, like I said, had to take one step forward out of that.
Yep.
Can you give an example?
I mean, I still do it. So it's like I still, on a day-to-day basis, I think I'll give you the most recent example that I kind of clued in on. And we both know the thing that's nice about picking up a meditation practice, hopefully, is that it's not then something you apply just to like, okay, these 20 minutes a day or whatever it is, 10 minutes, I'm going to pay attention to my thoughts and the rest of the time I'm just going to go back to being completely oblivious to the fact that these thoughts just show up in my mind. It should make you more aware the rest of your time where you're trying to be present, you're trying not to get lost in thought about the past or the future, and you're noticing things that you're thinking that are not helpful, right? Or when you get stuck on a thought. And the one that I've realized recently, and I put out an Instagram post about this, was what I say to myself when I work out. And I'm somebody who's worked out like his entire life and still I do it daily. Like I take my physical fitness very seriously. But God, I say a lot of negative shit while I'm working out. Like it's all just about being in pain and wanting it to be over. And this is, again, I go into this like wanting to do it every day.
Yeah.
And I just have this pattern of, oh, this sucks. And it's like, I'm so out of breath and I'm exhausted. And, or even thinking like this is because of some of the physical issues I've had chronically, like this might make things worse for me. Right.
Yeah.
And so I've really had to try to change that. And I catch myself doing it all the time still, where I'm like, I'll be, rowing or something like in the middle of these intervals. And I'd be like, what am I thinking right now? I'm thinking the negative shit again. And I keep trying to flip that script to, and I did it today working out. And like, you just find there's no reason not to do that. And like I find I actually feel a little bit better in the workout when I start telling myself anything positive. This is healthy for me. This is making me stronger.
Yeah.
This is a good thing I'm doing, and I'm starting to like even write it on. I've got a whiteboard in my gym. Like write a mantra up there before you start working out. Wow. That's positive. So if nothing else, look at that. Like remind yourself. Oh yeah, think that. Right. There's no reason not to do it, and it's only helpful. But yeah, dude. I mean, I've spent so much time lost in negative thought patterns. Yeah. And again, I don't like that term, unhelpful, useless thought patterns.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Unhelpful is a word I use a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that implies we recognize our context and we want to there's something we can do to make this better. It's not like for all of humanity, for all of time, this is the challenge, 10 million years ago when there were cave people walking around, like they didn't have time to sit around and think about this stuff. They had to make sure that they had a fire going and they had an animal that was killed that they could eat.
Yep.
And so today, what the context, I guess we wrestle with is just so much negativity in our culture, right? And so much sort of insecurity, whether we even would recognize it as such or not.
But I don't think we even realize, this is, I think, where I probably was going, where I was trying to go with the COVID stuff is we don't realize how much, and this goes back to a lack of awareness, how much these things affect us. Because to your point, we just want distractions these days. Like we don't even want to deal with but we're still thinking stuff, right? Even when we're scrolling on our phone, there's stuff going through there, but we've gotten ourselves so distracted where we're so not clued into the things that are going on in our head, and they're becoming probably less and less helpful because there's so much sort of anger and vitriol and negativity that's pushed on us every day through social media, through the news, through, right? Like stuff, you should be afraid of everything and angry about everything. And then we sort of like turn into junkies on it. So it's like we wake up every day and we're addicted to anger and we're addicted to fear.
Yeah.
And we just don't even realize it because it's like we're addicted to the distraction of it.
Yes.
Right. And if we could just take some time to go, you know what, let me put all this stuff down.
Yeah.
And like just examine what's going on in my own head, we'd be so much better off, and it's so much more beneficial.
Yeah. And for a lot of us, I think you and I are probably similar this way. We didn't start really doing this till recently in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't really taught to me. It wasn't really something I sought or valued. I was kind of forced into it to come to terms that I need to know this stuff, because if I'm gonna come out of this shit that I'm feeling, I got to know what it is and why it is.
Yeah, I never thought until my mid 40s that I could separate myself from my own. Like I didn't have to identify with my own thoughts.
Yeah,
I just thought that's me.
Yes.
I am my. What do you mean I'm not my thoughts? But then as soon as I started
you brought that up before. A lot of conversations we've had. I love that. That challenges me every time you say that.
Yeah. I mean, because most people do it. It's like, I am my thoughts. That's me. And the first time when I first started meditating a couple of years ago, and look, I'm not like somebody who, I think this is important too. I think people get wrapped around the axle like, you got to get all this meditation in, right? It's like it's a tool, and you got to figure out how to utilize it and you make it work for you. But even just the first time you can kind of clue into the fact that you're not in control of your thoughts; they just pop up. The first time you sort of close your eyes and do some meditation, where you're not trying to control anything, not trying to, you're just trying to see what happens, notice what's going on in your own head, and you realize, yeah, I'm not controlling any of this. It's just showing up, and I can observe that, and if I can observe that, then I can treat it just like um, any other narration out there, right? Any other stream of information on the television, on the radio, on my phone. Um, I can I like to think of it like the music on my phone, right? If I've got my phone
Yeah,
plugged into
that's
my
good.
truck and I've just got it on random, right? Just playing random songs. I'm not controlling the next song that shows up. And I can either, a song will come on that I'm like, oh yeah, I love that song and I can really get into it. Or I can go, skip, right? I can skip over that song. I'm not feeling that right now. Or if it's like
Yeah,
Spotify, I don't even like that song.
yeah,
We can do the exact same thing with our own thoughts,
yeah,
right? It can be, oh, that's really useful. Like, let me dwell on that. Or, oh, I don't need to spend any time paying attention to that. But that's not what we do for the most part, right?
yeah.
We think, I've got to listen to this song, right? And I've got to believe everything that it says because it's me. And, right?
Oh, yeah, and yes, I live this experience deeply, and I just want to point out. I don't know how many people are going to listen to this. Not everyone's going to really understand
Both
what
of
we're
you,
talking
thank you for
about.
listening.
Yes,
Appreciate
yes,
it.
yes, sir, and ma'am. Thank you. Um, Not everyone can follow this necessarily right now, right? A
Yeah,
lot of people today can though, and it's for me, it's such a profound, like life changing experience to come to that realization too,
yeah,
because then you spot what the messaging is that's coming at you better in our culture. I can turn on any news source, and just from the headline, from the topic, I can see where they're coming from, and I can keep a step away from it, so it's not getting me fired up. This is, you're being threatened, and your well-being is being threatened, and your job's being threatened, and of course that's going to get your attention if you know how your amygdala works. That's the
yeah,
stuff that gets your attention the quickest, and
right.
it shuts off when your amygdala, your fight or flight, right? This is what happens when we're suddenly alarmed or threatened or something's, happened. Why is there a truck speeding toward me? Suddenly I'm popping, right? But when that happens, I got lots of adrenaline. I got muscles. I can run. I can lift heavy things. I can grab my kid and get out of the way. But I cannot sit down and reason and think and love and feel compassion and these other things that I do want in my life, because those parts of the brain are shut down when the amygdala takes over, fight or
Right.
flight. And this gets back to the discussion about, do you believe you can really change? And we all can to an extent. And another thing I want to add to this discussion is how, there's a type of kind of psychotherapy called cognitive behavioral therapy. It's
Mhm.
real popular in America, CBT. You recognize in this therapy, it's all about self-awareness, about awareness of your emotions and your thoughts and how they affect your behaviors, right? And sometimes you have behaviors that we do, and then we have beliefs about them. Oh my God, I'm such a jerk for doing this again. I keep doing this. And I drank another 6-pack last night, and I ate 10 Oreos before I went to bed. Whatever the situation that's causing problems in your life, emotions pop up. And we can't really control emotions all the time. That's one thing that cognitive behavioral therapy sort of emphasizes.
Mhm.
But thoughts, yes, thoughts pop up and you can put them in their place, but you can start to affect them a little quicker than you can like your emotions around something.
Yep.
If somebody cuts you off, I'm angry about that. Yeah, that's okay. Feel angry. Now come over to this sort of more reasoning side. Why are you angry about that? Why is this such a big
Right.
deal right now?
Right.
Nobody's hitting you. Your kid's safe in the back seat. You're still on time. All these kinds of things.
Yes. And actually with the emotion thing, it's interesting, right? So I think of emotions like a reflex, right? So
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
that thing that doctors do where they hit your knee with the little
Yeah.
rubber
Yeah.
mallet and your leg kicks out.
Yeah. My 10-year-old
Something
thinks
like
that's the most hilarious thing on the planet. Is
who
that
does?
my 10-year-old Jackie?
Oh,
When I do it, dude, she's
yeah.
just doing it again. Oh my god, that's so crazy. Yeah.
But that to me is a lot like emotional reaction. And
Yeah.
that's why we call it a reaction, right?
Yeah.
Like to your point, someone cuts you off, you feel a certain way. But the difference is just like a reflex, to your point, you can spend an extremely small amount of time on that emotion if you choose
Yeah.
to. You can go, oh, I don't need to do that, right? So, like in my mind, anger is by and large a fairly useless emotion, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
something unless if you can truly analyze it and feel like this is serving me right now, which most of the time isn't true. You should be like, I recognize that. Don't need to spend any time on it because anger is so interesting too because it's directed at somebody else, but it's basically just hurting yourself, right? Like,
Can I point out something else there
yeah,
too? Anger most often comes from a place of hurt.
mm,
And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to admit.
mm-hmm.
Why are you angry when you watch such and such news source and they're talking about this topic?
Yes,
Why are you angry when your wife or your spouse says something to you and snaps at you? Doesn't mean she's like all of a sudden a bad person. Why really? What's going on underneath that anger? That's a really interesting question for me in my life, and I pose it to a lot of other people, and it's tough and really
yeah,
revealing.
yeah. But to that point, so is there a reason why, like the example you gave earlier, somebody cuts you off in traffic and you get angry?
Yeah.
Is that something where there's like a pain under that, or is that just right, or is that almost like just a
I
programmed response?
um, could be, and I like what you're saying. Like I work with a therapist who makes a difference, who differentiates when they talk about reaction and response. The reaction is just what pops up. Hard to really stop that or change that, but your response then to your reaction is what we can work on. And as far as driving goes, yeah, I am supposed to get to where I am going, right? That's for me. For me, that's what it is. I got my agenda here. I am very important. When you cut me off and you step in front of me, in front of the line, in front of me, I don't. Suddenly, you're telling me I'm not as important as you. And
Right.
under that is it for me is a level of insecurity.
So it's interesting you bring up the anger thing. This is what the article I'm going to do for September is about this topic because it's, I don't know why, but whatever I feel is most relevant, like in my mind, is what I kind of go towards. But I thought about this recently because I was noticing in myself that tendency. Certainly driving is one where you end up muttering stuff or yelling stuff.
Yeah.
And it's so useless. You're like, that person can't hear me. I don't know this person. I'm literally just winding myself up for no reason.
Yeah.
But then I started noticing myself doing it in other circumstances, sitting at a desk working during the day. And let's say a bunch of emails come all at once and a phone call at the same time, or I'm on a Zoom or something. And I find myself doing these things like God, fucking stop it or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's like, God, all these emails or something like that, where I'm angry at inanimate objects.
Yeah, I got so pissed at my phone this morning for something.
Right.
Yeah. Some app was really slow, and I was cursing at it.
Yes. Right. Something like that. And if you take a step back, you go, what am I doing? Why in God's name am I having this type of reaction? And I still find myself doing it again, but like trying to clue in on that and go, this is worthless, right? This is not helpful in any way, shape, or form.
And for me, it helps to just to accept my response and try, recognize it. Why was I cursing at my phone, like using the F word with an app? Partly because I'm tired. I haven't been sleeping great this week. I got a kid who's sick. I'm just a lot of work, so maybe I'm just like a little short tempered. I don't have the rest. I just try to figure it out. What I give myself there is just a little kind of compassion, like, all right, so I can move on to something else and not just keep being either angry or then frustrated that I'm angry and there's more, and, building and holding and keeping it together. Just
Right.
the way I get past it is to recognize why.
So we're coming up on an hour 20 here.
Yeah.
And I think we probably should wrap this up here in the next
Yeah.
5 to 10 minutes. So is there anything else topic that you really want to hit on? And we can do this again. I think we should.
Let's just plan on doing more of these.
Yeah, for sure.
You and I got a lot of topics we can hit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So want to end it there for today, for first one out of the gates. Yeah. So I think it was great, man. We covered a lot of good stuff there. So, stay on here once I stop recording. I forgot to say that at the beginning. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, Jeff.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.